I let my sister stay in my house. She tried to kick me out, so I took her to court. When my parents passed away, the shock came in waves. I wasn't ready for it, even though I'd spent years watching their health decline. Their deaths left me with more than just grief. It left me with responsibility. As their eldest son, I inherited the family home, a modest but cozy 2-story house in a quiet suburb of Ohio. It wasn't a glamorous inheritance, but it was filled with memories, ones I had held on to while caring for them in their final years. My sister, Amanda, didn't see it that way. At 25, she had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. Even when she moved to Chicago to chase a glamorous life in marketing, barely visiting except for major holidays, she retained a pedestal status. When the will was read, she got her share, a tidy sum from their savings and a few valuable investments. It was more than fair, but fairness wasn't what Amanda wanted. Amanda was always about appearances. She thrived in the high-rise apartments, designer wardrobes, and Instagram-worthy brunches. But the shimmer of her life started cracking. The word layoff came up in passing during one of her rare calls. The next thing I knew, she was at my doorstep with a suitcase and a request. Could she stay temporarily until she got back on her feet? I didn't say yes immediately. I'd spent years managing our parents' care mostly alone, and I wasn't eager to have Amanda's whirlwind energy disrupt the peace I had finally reclaimed. But she was my sister, and it felt cruel to turn her away. So I agreed, setting clear boundaries. It's just until you figure things out, I told her. But remember, this is still my house. Those words barely landed before Amanda began testing those boundaries. At first, it was subtle. Rearranging furniture, replacing the old curtains Mom had loved with modern blinds, and bringing in scented candles that clashed with the home's familiar, comforting smell. She called it updating, but it felt invasive. I told myself it was harmless, that she was just trying to feel comfortable. But then, her friends started showing up. The first time, it was just a couple of people. They stayed for dinner, laughed loudly in the living room, and left late. It wasn't a big deal, except she hadn't asked me first. The second time, it was a small group, cocktails, music, and a mess left for me to clean up the next morning. I confronted her about it, but Amanda had a way of brushing off criticism like dust off a shoulder. It's just a few people, Mark. Relax. You're too uptight. I wasn't relaxed, though. The house started feeling less like mine and more like a shared space I had no control over. Amanda's behavior grew bolder. She moved some of my things into storage without asking, insisting they were outdated. She talked about upgrading the kitchen and repainting the living room, acting as though her opinions outweighed mine. Then came the offhand comments, the ones that cut deeper than she realized. This house has so much potential. It's great that we can fix it up together, she said one day while flipping through a catalog of expensive furniture. Together? As if this were her project, her home. The alarm bells grew louder in my head. The tipping point came when she invited a contractor to the house. I came home from work to find them in the kitchen, discussing plans to knock out a wall to create an open concept. I didn't even know how to respond. She waved it off as no big deal, saying she was just exploring ideas. But it felt like an ambush, an attempt to stake her claim. Amanda, this isn't your house, I reminded her, my frustration bubbling over. Her expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something unsettling in her eyes. It wasn't just entitlement, it was resolve. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the gravity of the situation. Amanda wasn't just staying temporarily. She was setting roots, rearranging the foundation of my life piece by piece. And if I didn't do something soon, I'd lose control of the one thing I had left from our parents. The next morning, I found her scrolling through Zillow on her laptop, just checking out property values, she said, as if it was nothing. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. I couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda had a plan, one that didn't include me. Amanda's behavior escalated faster than I could have imagined. What started as small infractions, moving furniture and inviting guests, quickly snowballed into outright defiance. The day I came home to find the locks on my own house change was when I knew things had gone too far. She didn't even bother to tell me. I discovered it the hard way, standing on the porch with a bag of groceries, unable to get in. Amanda appeared minutes later, feigning innocence. "It's for security," she said, as if her decision to lock me out of my own home was a simple courtesy. She handed me a new key, but the message was clear. This wasn't just my house anymore. Her sense of entitlement grew bolder. She threw a party the following weekend, a loud and chaotic gathering that filled every corner of the house. Strangers wandered through rooms that still felt sacred to me, laughing and spilling drinks on the carpets my mother had once taken pride in. I stayed in my room, headphones on, trying to drown out the noise. But the humiliation was unavoidable. Then came the comments, cutting remarks disguised as casual observations. Amanda started telling me how much better the house would look with a younger vibe, dropping hints that my style was outdated and out of place. She even suggested that I consider moving out entirely, claiming that my introverted lifestyle clashed with the home's potential. "This house really suits me," she said once, flipping through a home design magazine. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. She was carving out her space, and if I didn't act soon, there wouldn't be any left for me. Frustration turned to action. I reached out to a lawyer, laying out the situation. I needed clarity on my rights and options. The lawyer didn't sugarcoat it. The house was mine, and Amanda had no legal claim to it, no matter how much she acted otherwise. Empowered by this knowledge, I decided to confront her. I gave her an ultimatum. If she wanted to stay, she needed to contribute financially to the household, rent, utilities, and repairs, or she had to leave. I thought this was a fair compromise. Instead of gratitude, Amanda responded with fury. She turned the situation into a battlefield. Within days, she had hired a lawyer of her own, challenging the will and questioning my inheritance. She claimed I had manipulated our parents into giving me the house, painting herself as the victim of favoritism. It was absurd, but it showed how far she was willing to go. The legal threats were just the beginning. Amanda began a full-blown campaign to discredit me. She called up extended family members, twisting the narrative to suit her needs. In her version, I was the cruel older brother who refused to share the family home, ignoring her struggles and treating her unfairly. My phone rang constantly. Aunts, uncles, and cousins wanted to know why I was being so heartless. Amanda's sob story worked on some of them, and I could feel the tide turning against me. People who hadn't been involved in our lives for years suddenly had opinions about how I should handle the situation. By the end of the week, Amanda had managed to turn what should have been a private matter into a family-wide drama. Her manipulation was working, and I was left feeling isolated in my own home. As much as I wanted to cut her off completely, I knew I had to play this carefully. Any wrong move could cost me the one thing I had left from our parents. For the first time, I started to wonder if Amanda had planned this all along. The timing of her arrival, her calculated charm, and the way she twisted every situation to her advantage. It was hard to ignore. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a power struggle, and Amanda was determined to win, no matter the cost. The situation spiraled further out of control when Amanda took her grievances public. Social media became her weapon of choice. She painted a vivid picture of herself as a younger sister cast aside, forced into an impossible situation by her controlling and emotionally abusive brother. Her posts were filled with just enough truth to make them seem credible, but were twisted to frame her as the victim. Pictures of her sitting on the porch of the house, looking distraught, were captioned with dramatic statements like, "Trying to rebuild my life, but some people make it impossible." Her strategy worked, at least at first. The likes and comments poured in, filled with sympathy and outrage. Strangers chimed in with unsolicited advice, and a few mutual acquaintances even reached out to scold me. For a moment, it felt like Amanda had all the power. But then, cracks started to show. Some of her friends, the ones who had been privy to her true personality over the years, began to see through the act. They reached out to me privately, offering their support and sharing stories of Amanda's manipulative tendencies. The most surprising ally came in the form of Troy, Amanda's ex-boyfriend. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he showed up unexpectedly, ready to talk. Troy's insights were invaluable. He described how Amanda had used similar tactics during their relationship, bending the truth to suit her narrative and turning people against him when he tried to call her out. He even showed me messages from their past arguments, where her pattern of manipulation was unmistakable. It was a strange sense of vindication, hearing someone else confirm what I had been experiencing. With Troy's help, I started to piece together a clearer picture of Amanda's motives. The breakthrough came when I decided to dig deeper into her financial situation. I had suspected for a while that her sudden move back home wasn't just about wanting to reconnect with family. A few discreet phone calls and some online sleuthing revealed the truth. Amanda was drowning in debt. She had maxed out credit cards, taken out loans she couldn't repay, and even faced a potential bankruptcy filing. The glamorous life she'd been projecting was a facade, and the family home was her safety net. Armed with this information, I consulted my lawyer again. Together, we compiled a case that left no room for doubt. Amanda's financial struggles, her history of manipulation, and her disruptive behavior were all meticulously documented. The day we filed the legal notice was a turning point. Amanda's confident facade cracked when she realized I wasn't backing down. The court hearing was the climax of our conflict. Amanda arrived with her lawyer, ready to fight, but she wasn't prepared for the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer presented everything: her social media posts, testimony from mutual acquaintances, and most damning of all, her financial records. The judge's expression grew sterner with each revelation. Amanda's lawyer tried to spin the narrative, claiming she was a victim of circumstance, but it was clear the facts didn't support her story. By the end of the hearing, the decision was final. The house was mine, and Amanda was given 30 days to vacate. The verdict felt like a victory, but it was bittersweet. As Amanda left the courtroom, she refused to meet my gaze. Her once overwhelming presence seemed diminished, almost fragile. But I couldn't let myself feel pity. This was a battle I hadn't chosen, but one I had to fight to protect what little I had left of our family's legacy. The countdown to Amanda's eviction was tense, but I had no idea how far she would go. A few days before her deadline, I came home to find the house in chaos. Walls were defaced with crude messages, furniture smashed, and family photos either torn or missing. It was a deliberate act of spite, her final attempt to leave a mark, literally and figuratively. Instead of reacting impulsively, I took out my phone and documented everything: photos, videos, even the smallest details. I made sure to capture the destruction she had caused. It wasn't just about the damage. It was about accountability. My lawyer assured me this evidence would strengthen my case for restitution. As Amanda's deadline approached, her facade crumbled further. News of her financial troubles and manipulative schemes spread among her social circle. The same people who once rallied behind her social media sob stories now saw her for who she truly was. Invitations stopped, calls went unanswered, and her once vibrant social life evaporated. Amanda, who thrived on attention and validation, was left to face the isolation she had created for herself. Despite everything, I couldn't ignore the mix of emotions brewing inside me. Anger and betrayal were at the forefront, but there was also a lingering sadness. The house, once a symbol of family and warmth, now felt tainted by bitterness and conflict. It was clear to me that holding on to it wouldn't bring me peace. Instead, I began to see it as a chapter that needed to close. Amanda, however, wasn't ready to let go. Even after the court's decision, she made one last desperate attempt to drag me back into her chaos. She filed absurd legal claims, accusing me of mismanaging the property and withholding her share of the inheritance. Her arguments were baseless, and the court dismissed them swiftly. Each defeat pushed her further into obscurity. By the time the dust settled, Amanda's life was unrecognizable. Her reputation was in shambles, and she had burned every bridge she once relied on. Meanwhile, I found myself standing in the ruins of what used to be a home, ready to move forward. The damage Amanda caused wasn't just physical, it was emotional. But in the wreckage, I discovered something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. Selling the house wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. After everything Amanda had done, the place no longer felt like home. It had become a reminder of the turmoil and broken ties. With a heavy heart, I listed it for sale and began the process of letting go. Rosa, a longtime friend who had been quietly supporting me through all of this, became my anchor. She'd check in regularly, reminding me that moving on wasn't just about leaving the house behind. It was about finding peace. Her calm demeanor and unwavering kindness were a stark contrast to the chaos Amanda had brought into my life. Rosa's encouragement gave me the strength to envision a future that wasn't tied to my family's past. The legal matters surrounding Amanda wrapped up faster than I expected. With the evidence I had gathered, it was easy to close the chapter on her baseless claims. Once the paperwork was finalized, I made a firm decision. No more contact with Amanda. There had been too many betrayals, too much damage. For the first time in years, I felt free. When the house finally sold, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Watching the new owners move in, I realized that the home would get a fresh start, even if I couldn't. It felt symbolic, a way to close the door on that painful chapter of my life. I used the proceeds from the sale to secure a modest apartment in a nearby town, a place where I could truly start over. Just as I was settling into my new routine, a letter arrived. It was from Amanda. Her handwriting was familiar, but the words felt like they belonged to a stranger. She spoke of regret, asking for a chance to mend things. She claimed she'd changed, that she wanted to rebuild our relationship. But as I read her words, all I could think about was the destruction she had left in her wake. I didn't respond. For years, I had been trapped in a cycle of forgiving and forgetting, only to be hurt again. This time, I chose myself. Ignoring her letter wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. Amanda's chapter in my life was over, and I wasn't going back. With each passing day, the weight of the past grew lighter. Rosa and I grew closer, spending weekends exploring new towns, trying unfamiliar foods, and laughing in a way I hadn't in years. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt like I was truly living, not just surviving.
Bye-bye.